So, you're sitting down, flipping through the Bible, and suddenly you realize there are two completely different portrayals of God. On one side, there's the God of love and mercy, the one who forgives, saves, and offers hope. But then there's this other version, the one full of wrath, commanding wars, wiping out civilizations, and dealing out punishments that feel downright brutal. It's almost as if you're reading about two completely separate beings, right? Well, maybe that's because you are. The dual nature of God in the Bible is one of the most ignored yet highly debated topics in religious history. For over 2,000 years, we've been taught that Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, is the same as the God of love and forgiveness that Jesus preaches about in the New Testament. But what if that's not entirely accurate? What if the ancient Israelites' God wasn't a single, unified figure of goodness, but actually two entirely distinct entities whose stories were later fused together? Let's dive into this. The name Yahweh dominates the Old Testament, but let's not sugarcoat it. This is a God who commands plagues, flattens cities, orders executions, and destroys entire populations. Not exactly the kind forgiving father figure we hear about in Sunday school. Yahweh was a God of fear, a deity you worshiped not out of love but because you were terrified of the consequences if you didn't. Step out of line, and you faced annihilation. But here's the twist. The God we meet in the New Testament is nothing like Yahweh. Jesus speaks of a God of love, of turning the other cheek, of forgiving even your enemies. This stark contrast didn't go unnoticed. Early Christians struggled with it too. In fact, some groups like the Gnostics went so far as to claim that Yahweh wasn't the true God at all. They believed he was a flawed, inferior being, a pretender to divinity. The Gnostics viewed Yahweh as a deceiver, a false deity who kept humanity shackled in ignorance and fear. Let's pause for a second. What if, just consider this, what if the God people have worshipped for millennia wasn't the true creator at all, but more like a cosmic dictator keeping us under his thumb? Meanwhile, the real God, the God of light, love, and truth, was quietly overshadowed, pushed into the background of history. If you look into ancient Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Secret Book of John, you'll find them describing Yahweh as what they call the demiurge. According to these writings, Yahweh wasn't the supreme God but a lesser being who created the material world as a kind of prison to trap human souls. The real God, they said, was far beyond Yahweh, unknowable, transcendent, and utterly benevolent. For the Gnostics, life's mission was to break free from Yahweh's control and reconnect with this higher, hidden truth. But here's the burning question. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? Why is this side of the story so thoroughly buried? Because over the centuries, the Church made a deliberate choice to merge these two gods, the wrathful Yahweh and the loving God of Jesus, into one figure. Why? To consolidate power and control the beliefs of the masses. Anyone who dared to question this narrative? They were labeled heretics and silenced. Let's be real here. How can the same God who commands us to love one another also order the destruction of entire nations? Could it be that we've been handed an overly simplified story, one that glosses over some inconvenient truths? If Yahweh was just one deity among many in ancient times, what does that mean for the whole concept of monotheism? Did early people truly believe in one God, or was Yahweh simply the God whose followers happened to win out and write the story? And that brings us to a critical question. How did the Bible as we know it come to be? Why are certain books included while others were deliberately left out? The answer lies in politics, not divine intervention. Around 325 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine faced a fractured empire, and he saw Christianity as a way to unify it. But here's the catch. There were too many versions of Christianity floating around. Some Christians believed Jesus was purely divine, while others saw him as a human teacher. Different groups followed gospels that painted vastly different pictures of who Jesus was. Constantine needed a standardized religion to stabilize his empire. So he convened the Council of Nicaea, not as a spiritual quest for truth, but as a political strategy to consolidate power. At this council, the most powerful bishops came together, not to discover divine truths, but to decide which beliefs were politically convenient, which gospels stayed, and which ones were tossed out. Ever heard of the Gospel of Thomas? It's a fascinating text where Jesus emphasizes self-discovery and enlightenment. Or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which portrays Mary as one of Jesus' closest disciples and a spiritual leader in her own right. These texts didn't make the cut. Why? Because they didn't fit Constantine's agenda. The version of Christianity that emerged from Nicaea was carefully crafted to support the authority of the church and the state. Questioning it was not just discouraged, it became outright dangerous. The Council of Nicaea didn't just decide which texts belonged in the Bible. It solidified doctrines like the concept of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as one. Here's the kicker. Not all Christians at the time even believed in the Trinity. It was an idea imposed as official dogma, and anyone who rejected it was branded a heretic. Alternative beliefs and texts were hunted down, destroyed, and erased from history. Groups like the Gnostics and others were driven into hiding, their sacred writings buried to protect them from annihilation. Fast forward to today, and we're only just starting to rediscover some of these lost texts. In the 1940s, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt unearthed dozens of Gnostic writings, including the Gospel of Thomas. These texts reveal a radically different understanding of Jesus, God, and existence, one that was deliberately suppressed. So, when someone claims the Bible is the infallible Word of God, we have to ask, which version of God's Word are they talking about? The one curated by Constantine and his bishops, or the broader, unfiltered truth that was hidden away for centuries? And here's where it gets even more mind-blowing. Ancient groups like the Gnostics didn't even see the God of the Bible as the ultimate creator. They viewed him as a flawed, oppressive being who trapped humanity in a false reality. In their eyes, the true God was something far greater, hidden, unknowable, and entirely beyond the material world. According to Gnostic teachings, Yahweh wasn't just flawed. He was a kind of jailer, keeping humanity locked in ignorance. These ideas flip the traditional biblical narrative completely. What if the true purpose of life isn't to obey Yahweh, but to escape his control and reconnect with a higher, transcendent source? The Gnostics believed humanity was trapped in a false reality, an imperfect material world created by the demiurge, the being they equated with Yahweh. In their view, this false god deceived humanity, demanding worship and loyalty while suppressing the truth about the divine spark that resides within each of us. To the Gnostics, the material world wasn't a gift from God. It was a prison, filled with pain, suffering, and ignorance, all designed to keep us distracted from the true spiritual realm that lies beyond it. And here's the kicker. They saw Jesus as the one who came to wake us up from this illusion. In the Gnostic texts, Jesus isn't the Savior who dies for our sins to appease an angry God. Instead, he's a spiritual teacher, a guide sent by the true, unknowable God to show humanity the way out of the demiurge's grasp. His teachings weren't about obedience or submission, but about enlightenment, understanding the truth of our divine nature and breaking free from the cycle of ignorance. Take the Gospel of Judas, for instance. In this text, Jesus tells Judas that he's the only disciple who truly understands his mission. Judas's role in betraying Jesus is reframed, not as a betrayal at all, but as part of a divine plan to help Jesus transcend the physical world and return to the higher realm of the true God. It's a perspective that completely upends the traditional Christian narrative, portraying Judas not as a villain, but as someone who helped bring about spiritual liberation. But the Gnostics' teachings didn't stop there. They claimed that organized religion, especially the kind enforced by institutions like the church, wasn't just misguided, but actively complicit in the demiurge's plan. According to them, these systems were designed to keep humanity spiritually blind, trapped in a cycle of fear, obedience, and materialism. Think about it. Religions that preach submission to an all-powerful, jealous God, that discourage questioning, and that emphasize guilt and sin, don't these sound like the very tools the demiurge would use to maintain control? For the Gnostics, salvation wasn't about following rules or rituals, but about breaking free from this system altogether. It was about seeking knowledge, gnosis, that revealed the truth of our divine origin and the reality beyond the physical world. And this brings us to a fundamental question. If these ideas were so profound, so revolutionary, why were they buried? Why were Gnostic texts labeled heretical and destroyed? The answer is simple: control. If people started believing they didn't need priests, churches, or religious institutions to connect with the divine, those institutions would lose their power. The church couldn't afford for people to believe that salvation was something they could achieve on their own, without intermediaries. So, the Gnostics and their teachings were systematically erased from history. Their texts were burned, their communities persecuted, and their ideas branded as dangerous heresies. And the truth is, this wasn't an isolated incident. The suppression of alternative beliefs has been a recurring theme throughout history. Let's take a moment to talk about the concept of rebellion itself. In the traditional Christian narrative, rebellion is seen as the ultimate sin, the root of all evil. The story of Lucifer, the fallen angel, is the prime example. Lucifer's defiance of God's authority is portrayed as the ultimate act of pride, leading to his banishment and eternal punishment. But what if we've misunderstood this story? What if Lucifer's rebellion wasn't about evil at all, but about freedom, knowledge, and enlightenment? The name Lucifer literally means lightbringer or morning star. That's not the name of a villain, it's the name of someone who brings illumination. In the Garden of Eden story, the serpent, often associated with Lucifer, offers Adam and Eve the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What does this fruit represent? Awareness, understanding, the ability to discern good from evil. Before eating it, Adam and Eve were living in ignorance, blindly following God's commands without question. The serpent doesn't force them to eat the fruit. He simply offers them a choice. And when they take that choice, their eyes are opened. They see the world for what it is, for better or worse. Now, think about how this changes the narrative. Instead of being the villain, the serpent becomes the one who empowers humanity, who gives them the tools to think for themselves. Yes, Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden, but isn't that the very moment humanity begins its journey of self-awareness and growth? Isn't that the first step toward understanding the world, questioning authority, and seeking deeper truths? In this light, Lucifer's rebellion isn't about evil, it's about rejecting control. It's about defying a system that demands blind obedience and instead choosing freedom, even if it comes with consequences. And this idea isn't limited to Christianity. Many ancient traditions have stories of rebellious figures who defy the gods to bring knowledge or power to humanity. Prometheus, in Greek mythology, steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans, enabling civilization to flourish. He's punished for his defiance, but he's remembered as a hero, not a villain. Could Lucifer be a similar figure, a bringer of light who's been misunderstood and vilified by those in power? And if so, what does that mean for the way we view authority, obedience, and morality? Here's where it gets even more interesting. Some Gnostic traditions don't see Lucifer as evil at all. In fact, they portray him as a liberator, a figure who challenges the demiurge's control and tries to free humanity from the illusion of the material world. In these stories, the true villain isn't Lucifer but the demiurge, the flawed creator who set up the system of oppression in the first place. Lucifer, in this context, is the one who dares to stand against the demiurge, to bring knowledge and enlightenment to humanity. But let's take a step back and think about why this perspective has been so thoroughly suppressed. If people started seeing rebellion as a path to enlightenment, if they started questioning authority instead of blindly following it, the entire framework of organized religion, and by extension, the power structures it supports, would start to crumble. Obedience is the cornerstone of institutional control. Questioning authority is dangerous, not because it leads to chaos, but because it leads to freedom. So here's the big uncomfortable question. What if the story we've been told about good and evil is itself a tool of control? What if the true sin isn't rebellion, but submission? What if the real danger isn't in seeking knowledge, but in rejecting it? These aren't just hypothetical questions. They cut to the heart of how we understand ourselves, our faith, and our place in the universe. And they force us to confront a truth that many people aren't ready to face. The version of reality we've been given might not be the whole story. For thousands of years, institutions have worked tirelessly to maintain a specific narrative about God, humanity, and the universe. They've suppressed alternative ideas, destroyed texts, and silenced dissenting voices, all in the name of preserving truth. But the truth doesn't need to be defended with violence or censorship. The truth can stand on its own. So if these ideas were so dangerous that they had to be erased, doesn't that make you wonder what they were really afraid of? Could it be that the real power lies not in obedience, but in questioning? Not in submission, but in seeking out the light, wherever it may lead. Consider the sheer lengths to which the church and other institutions have gone to control the narrative. Entire communities, like the Cathars in medieval France, were wiped out simply because their beliefs didn't align with the church's teachings. The Cathars believed in a dualistic universe, much like the Gnostics, where the material world was seen as the creation of a corrupt lower deity. They rejected the authority of the church and lived by their own spiritual principles, nonviolence, simplicity, and a focus on spiritual enlightenment. For these beliefs, they were branded heretics. And in 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal campaign to exterminate the Cathars. Towns were burned to the ground. Tens of thousands of men, women, and children were slaughtered, and their teachings were obliterated from history. When a crusader asked how to distinguish the Cathars from regular Christians, a church official reportedly replied, "Kill them all. God will know his own." It's one of the most chilling examples of how far the church was willing to go to silence dissent. And then there's the Inquisition. Picture this. You're living in medieval Europe. Maybe you're a scholar with some unorthodox ideas, or perhaps you've just asked a question that doesn't sit well with the local clergy. Next thing you know, you're dragged before a tribunal, accused of heresy. You're interrogated, tortured until you confess to crimes you may not have even committed, and then burned at the stake, all to make an example of you. The Inquisition wasn't about seeking truth. It was about instilling fear, ensuring that no one dared step out of line. And the witch hunts? Those were another dark chapter, where anyone, especially women, who defied societal norms or possessed knowledge outside the church's approval, was labeled a witch and executed. Herbalists, midwives, widows, or simply women who didn't conform, these were the ones targeted. Tens of thousands were tortured and killed, accused of consorting with the devil. Why? Because independent thought, especially from women, represented a threat to the established order. The church wasn't just defending its version of God, it was defending its monopoly on truth, its claim to be the sole gatekeeper of salvation. This wasn't about faith, it was about power. After all, if you control the narrative about God, you control how people see themselves, their purpose, and their relationship to the universe. And if you control those things, you control everything. But here's the paradox. Truth doesn't need fear to protect it. Truth doesn't need violence or censorship to survive. If something is genuinely true, it can withstand scrutiny. It can handle questions. The fact that the church went to such extreme lengths to crush dissent should make us wonder, what were they so afraid of? What did they see in these alternative ideas that made them feel so threatened? Take the story of Giordano Bruno, for example. He was a 16th-century philosopher and theologian who dared to propose ideas that challenged the church's teachings. He believed in an infinite universe filled with countless stars and planets, many of which could harbor life. He also questioned the church's dogma, suggesting that God was much bigger, more unknowable, than the rigid, human-like figure portrayed by religion. For these heresies, he was imprisoned for years and eventually burned alive in 1600. Think about that. Bruno's ideas, many of which were later validated by science, were so dangerous to the church that they felt the need to kill him. Why? Because his ideas undermined their authority. They suggested a universe far greater than the one confined to their doctrines. And if people started thinking like Bruno, if they started questioning the church's teachings, then the church's power would crumble. And this fear of losing control didn't just target individuals. Entire belief systems were eradicated. Alternative texts, like those of the Gnostics, were systematically destroyed. Sacred writings that offered different perspectives on God, humanity, and the universe were burned or buried. Libraries, like the one at Alexandria, were lost to time, taking with them untold amounts of knowledge. And what survived was carefully curated to fit a single narrative, one that reinforced obedience, submission, and dependence on the church. But here's the irony. The truth has a way of resurfacing. In 1945, a cache of Gnostic texts known as the Nag Hammadi Library was discovered in Egypt. These ancient writings, hidden for nearly 2,000 years, revealed a radically different view of spirituality. One focused on inner knowledge, personal transformation, and liberation from the material world. And in the decades since, other lost texts, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, have come to light, offering glimpses of a much richer, more diverse spiritual tradition than the one the Church has handed down. These discoveries beg the question: what else has been lost? What other truths were suppressed, hidden, or destroyed in the name of control? And perhaps most importantly, why? If the Church's version of God is the only truth, why go to such lengths to silence other voices? The answer, it seems, is that the Church's authority wasn't built on absolute truth. It was built on maintaining power. And power, as history shows us, doesn't tolerate dissent. The suppression of alternative beliefs isn't just a relic of the past. It's something we still feel the effects of today. The fear of questioning religious authority, the stigma around exploring different spiritual paths, the idea that rebellion is inherently wrong. These are all echoes of a time when dissent was met with fire and steel. But maybe it's time we move past that fear. Maybe it's time to start asking the questions that got so many people silenced in the first place. What if the God we've been taught to worship isn't the whole picture? What if there's more to the story than the version we've been given? What if the truth about the universe, about divinity, about ourselves, is something we have to discover for ourselves, outside the confines of doctrine, dogma, and institutional control? Maybe the real act of faith isn't in obedience, but in the courage to seek out the light, even when it challenges everything we've been told. And maybe, just maybe, the stories that were suppressed, the voices that were silenced, and the truths that were buried weren't lost forever. They've been waiting for us to rediscover them, to question the narrative, and to see the world in a new way. What happens next? Well, that's up to us. The journey for truth isn't over, it's only just beginning. Let's keep peeling back the layers of this story, because the implications go far beyond ancient texts, forgotten beliefs, or lost knowledge. The deeper you dive, the more you begin to see that the struggle over truth, control, and authority isn't just about religion. It's about how humanity itself has been shaped. It's about the systems we've built, the narratives we live by, and the boundaries we've been told not to cross. And one of the most profound examples of this lies in the story of Lucifer, the so-called lightbringer. We've been taught to see Lucifer as the ultimate villain, the enemy of God, and all that is good. But when you start to question that narrative, when you look at it through a different lens, a startling possibility emerges. What if Lucifer's rebellion wasn't an act of malice but of liberation? What if the story of the fall is a metaphor, not for disobedience as a sin, but for the courage to question, to seek knowledge, and to challenge authority? Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. In the traditional narrative, the serpent, often linked to Lucifer, tempts Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, leading to their expulsion from paradise. But think about what the serpent actually offers them: knowledge, awareness, the ability to discern for themselves what is right and wrong. Before this moment, Adam and Eve are depicted as innocent, but also ignorant, living in a kind of blissful submission, unaware of their potential or their place in the universe. When they eat the fruit, their eyes are opened. They gain self-awareness. They start to see the world differently, to understand themselves and their choices in a way they couldn't before. Yes, they're cast out of the garden, but isn't this also the moment they begin their journey as fully realized beings? Isn't this the beginning of human consciousness, creativity, and growth? And if so, why is the serpent, the one who sparks this transformation, seen as the villain? In many ancient traditions, figures like the serpent or Lucifer aren't symbols of evil, but of enlightenment. In Greek mythology, Prometheus defies the gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity, enabling civilization to thrive. For this act of rebellion, he's punished, but to humanity, he's a hero, a bringer of light and knowledge. Similarly, in some Gnostic interpretations, Lucifer is seen not as a force of destruction, but as a liberator. They believed Lucifer challenged the demiurge, the false god who created the material world and tried to awaken humanity to its true divine nature. Here's where things get even more interesting. If we view the serpent's actions as a form of liberation rather than temptation, it raises profound questions about the nature of authority and obedience. What if the true danger isn't in rebellion, but in submission? What if the real fall wasn't eating the fruit, but remaining in a state of ignorance and blind obedience? These questions aren't just philosophical. They strike at the very heart of how we understand morality, faith, and what it means to be human. But it doesn't stop there. This idea of questioning authority isn't just a spiritual concept, it's a human one. Throughout history, every major step forward has come from someone challenging the status quo, whether it's scientific discoveries, social revolutions, or movements for justice and equality. Progress always starts with a question. Why? Why are things this way? Why do we have to follow these rules? Why can't we think differently, live differently, be different? And yet, the systems of power, whether religious, political, or cultural, have always tried to suppress those questions. They label dissenters as heretics, rebels, or troublemakers. They burn books, silence voices, and punish those who dare to think differently. Why? Because questions are dangerous. Questions lead to change, and change threatens the people who benefit most from keeping things the way they are. Think about the story of the Bible itself. We're told it's the infallible Word of God, but as we've already discussed, it's also a product of human decisions made by councils, emperors, and religious leaders who had their own agendas. Entire books were excluded because they didn't fit the narrative. Entire communities were erased because their beliefs challenged the institution. And yet, those excluded voices, the Gnostics, the Cathars, the mystics, and the heretics, still speak to us through the fragments of texts we've recovered and the questions they inspire. What they tell us is this: the truth isn't something that can be contained in a single book, a single doctrine, or a single institution. The truth is bigger than that. It's messy, complex, and often uncomfortable. It doesn't fit neatly into the boxes we try to put it in. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the truth is something we have to seek out for ourselves, through questioning, exploring, and challenging the narratives we've been handed. If we start to view rebellion not as a sin, but as a virtue, everything changes. Rebellion becomes a form of awakening, a way of breaking free from systems that seek to limit our understanding. It's not about rejecting faith or spirituality. It's about expanding it, about looking beyond the narrow frameworks we've been given and seeing the divine in new and profound ways. Take the Gnostics, for example. They didn't reject God. They redefined what God meant. They saw divinity not as something distant and authoritarian, but as something within us, something we could access directly. They believed that each person had a divine spark, a piece of the true God, and that our purpose was to awaken that spark and reconnect with the source of all creation. To them, organized religion, especially the kind that demanded obedience to a wrathful God, wasn't a path to salvation. It was a trap. And that's why their teachings were so dangerous. If people believed they could find God within themselves, they wouldn't need priests, churches, or institutions to mediate that connection. They wouldn't need to follow rigid rules or accept dogmas they didn't understand. They would be free, spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally. And that kind of freedom is terrifying to anyone who wants to maintain control. This isn't just about religion, it's about power. It's about the way systems throughout history have used fear to keep people in line. Fear of sin, fear of hell, fear of questioning. But the truth is, fear isn't the path to enlightenment. Fear keeps us small, limited, and disconnected. The real path, the one the Gnostics, the mystics, and the rebels have always pointed to, is one of courage. The courage to ask questions, to seek knowledge, and to embrace the unknown. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a choice. We can continue to accept the narratives we've been given, to live within the boundaries that others have set for us. Or we can start to ask the hard questions. Who or what is God, really? Is God the figure we've been told to obey, or is God something much larger, more mysterious, and more personal than we've ever imagined? Is the truth about the universe something we've lost, or something we're just beginning to rediscover? And what about the stories we've been taught to fear? The stories of rebellion, of questioning, of seeking knowledge? What if they aren't warnings but invitations? What if they're calling us to step outside the garden, to eat the fruit, to open our eyes and see the world for what it really is? Maybe the fall wasn't a fall at all. Maybe it was a step forward, a step toward freedom, growth, and understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the light that Lucifer is said to have brought wasn't a curse, but a gift. A reminder that we don't have to accept the world as it is, that we can question, challenge, and change it, that we can seek the truth for ourselves, even if it means defying the powers that be. So what will you do with that light? Will you let it guide you? Or will you turn away, afraid of what you might find? The choice is yours, and it always has been. The choice to seek truth, to question the narrative, and to embrace the light of understanding is not an easy one. It's uncomfortable, even frightening, to step outside of what we've always known or been told to believe. But maybe that discomfort is the point. Growth, by its very nature, is messy and painful. To step into the unknown is to risk everything you've built your identity on, but it's also the only way to uncover something greater. Let's return to the metaphor of the Garden of Eden for a moment. If the fall of Adam and Eve represents humanity's first step toward consciousness and self-awareness, then the expulsion from Eden wasn't a punishment. It was a rite of passage. It was humanity leaving behind the simplicity of ignorance and stepping into the complexity of free will. Yes, free will comes with challenges. It means we have to face the consequences of our choices, confront our fears, and wrestle with moral ambiguity. But it also means we have the power to shape our own destiny. And that's precisely what the powers that be, whether religious, political, or societal, have always feared. They fear a humanity that thinks for itself, that questions authority, that refuses to accept the world as it's presented. A humanity that understands its own power is a humanity that cannot be controlled. This is why rebellion, whether it's Lucifer's defiance, Prometheus stealing fire, or the Gnostics seeking hidden knowledge, has always been demonized. Because rebellion is a threat to control, and control is the cornerstone of every system of power. But rebellion doesn't have to mean chaos. It doesn't have to mean destruction for its own sake. True rebellion, the kind that leads to enlightenment, is about questioning the rules that no longer serve us and creating something better in their place. It's about tearing down the walls that confine us, not so we can live without boundaries, but so we can build new ones that reflect a deeper understanding of who we are and what we're capable of. This brings us back to the suppressed texts, the alternative beliefs, and the voices that have been silenced throughout history. What makes these ideas so powerful and so dangerous is that they decentralize authority. They suggest that the divine isn't something external, something mediated by priests, churches, or sacred texts. Instead, they tell us that the divine is something we can find within ourselves, something we can access directly through personal experience, introspection, and connection with the world around us. Take, for instance, the Gospel of Thomas, one of the texts found in the Nag Hammadi library. It's not a narrative like the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Instead, it's a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus, sayings that focus on self-discovery and inner transformation. One of the most striking lines is, "The kingdom of God is inside you and all around you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are children of the living Father." Think about what that implies. It shifts the focus away from external worship and toward internal exploration. It tells us that salvation doesn't come from obeying rules or rituals, but from understanding who we truly are. That's a radical message, one that empowers individuals and challenges institutions. No wonder texts like this were excluded from the official Bible. And then there's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which portrays Mary as a spiritual leader, someone who understood Jesus' teachings on a deeper level than even his male disciples. In this text, Peter challenges Mary's authority, asking why Jesus would reveal such profound truths to a woman. Mary responds with calm confidence, sharing her vision and wisdom. This portrayal of Mary as an equal, if not superior to the male apostles, threatens the patriarchal structure that has dominated Christianity for centuries. It suggests that spiritual authority isn't determined by gender or hierarchy, but by insight and understanding. And here's the thing. Their rebellion wasn't just about rejecting something. It was about creating something new. Bruno didn't just reject the church's teachings. He proposed a vision of the cosmos that was vast, infinite, and awe-inspiring. The Gnostics didn't just critique Yahweh. They offered an alternative vision of God as a hidden, unknowable source of pure light and love. The mystics didn't just defy the church's authority. They sought direct, personal experiences of the divine that transcended words and rituals. Their acts of rebellion weren't destructive. They were creative. They opened new doors, expanded horizons, and invited humanity to see the world in ways that were richer, deeper, and more complex. And now, here we are, at a point in history where those doors are opening again. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other suppressed writings has given us a glimpse into the spiritual diversity of the past. The questions that were silenced for centuries are now being asked again. What if the God we've been taught to worship isn't the true God? What if divinity isn't something external but something within us? What if the purpose of life isn't obedience but awakening? These aren't just abstract ideas. They have real implications for how we live our lives. If the divine spark is within us, then what does that say about our potential? If salvation comes from knowledge and self-discovery, then what does that say about the systems that demand our submission? If rebellion is a path to enlightenment, then what does that say about the structures of power that tell us to conform? These questions aren't just about religion. They're about everything. They're about how we see ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. They're about the stories we tell, the systems we build, and the choices we make. And they're about reclaiming our power, the power to think, to question, and to create. But here's the catch. Power doesn't like to be questioned. Whether it's the church, the state, or any other institution, those in power will always try to maintain control. And one of the most effective ways they do this is by controlling the narrative, by telling us who God is, who we are, and what our place in the universe should be, by creating a framework of good and evil that reinforces obedience and punishes dissent, by teaching us to fear the light, to fear the very thing that could set us free. So what do? How do we break free from these narratives and reclaim the truth for ourselves? The answer lies in doing exactly what those in power fear most: questioning. Not just passively accepting what we've been told, but actively seeking out new perspectives, exploring alternative ideas, and listening to the voices that have been silenced. It means being willing to step outside of the familiar, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust that the journey itself has value, even if it doesn't lead to clear answers. This doesn't mean rejecting everything outright. The Bible, the church, and the traditions we've inherited all contain wisdom, beauty, and insight. But they are not the whole story. They are pieces of a much larger puzzle. And if we want to see the full picture, we have to be willing to look beyond them, to seek out the forgotten texts, the suppressed ideas, and the alternative perspectives that offer a richer, more complex understanding of God, humanity, and the universe. And that's where you come in. Each of us has the power to embark on this journey, to ask the questions that scare us, and to seek out the light that has been hidden for so long. This isn't just a personal journey. It's a collective one. The more we question, the more we discover. The more we discover, the more we grow. And the more we grow, the closer we come to understanding the truth. Not the truth handed down to us by institutions, but the truth we uncover for ourselves. It's not an easy path. There will be doubts, fears, and moments when you wonder if it's all worth it. But every step you take, every question you ask brings you closer to the light of understanding, of awakening, of seeing the world as it truly is. And in that light, you may find something even greater than the answers you're seeking. You may find yourself. So, as you stand at the crossroads, the question remains: will you take the step? Will you eat the fruit, leave the garden, and venture into the unknown? Will you challenge the narratives that confine you and seek out the truth, no matter where it leads? Because the journey isn't just about finding the truth. It's about becoming the kind of person who can hold it, live it, and share it with others. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to bring light into the world, to illuminate the darkness, not with certainty, but with curiosity, to challenge the systems that keep us in the dark, not with anger but with courage. To seek out the divine, not as something distant and separate, but as something within us, around us, and between us. The light is already there. It's in the questions we ask, the truths we seek, and the connections we make. It's in the courage to question, to explore, and to grow. And it's waiting for you to see it, to embrace it, and to share it with the world. So what will you do with it? The choice is yours. And it always has been. Life is messy, complicated, and full of questions that challenge the very foundations of what we believe. And that's okay, because it's through those questions, through that discomfort, that we find growth and deeper understanding. To everyone who's joined us on this journey, thank you. Thank you for your curiosity, for your willingness to think critically, and for being brave enough to explore ideas that aren't always easy to confront. If this journey has sparked something in you, if it's encouraged you to look beyond the surface and ask the big questions, then we've done something meaningful here. If you've made it this far, you've proven that you're not afraid to challenge the narratives, to sit with the complexities, and to seek out the truth, no matter how hidden it may be. If you've enjoyed this exploration and want to dive deeper, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. This is just the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that will keep unfolding as long as we keep asking, keep searching, and keep learning together. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, stay open, and wherever the truth may be hiding, may we all find the light to uncover it. Thanks again for watching. God bless us all, on whatever path we're walking.